The question more broadly, and I'm asked this all the time, and I will, in the interest of candor, tell you, I am a supporter of Senator Obama. We have contributed to his campaign. He was a classmate of my wife, law school classmate. So you evaluate my comments with that information in mind, in the interest of full disclosure. Having said that, however, regrettably, the lesson of history does not uniformly support the idea that there will be dramatic change in the architecture of executive power. What I tell people as shorthand for this is, everybody thinks executive power is a problem until it's theirs to wield. And then suddenly they think it's not so bad. And that is why, as Bruce was pointing out, you have this system of control that prevents them from accumulating this power, right? Because we don't trust them. Do I think it's a wash? Do I think that all presidential candidates or all politicians are the same and that once they get into office, they drink the Kool-Aid and they're all? I don't believe that. But I am guarded about the idea that our worries will be passed if we, frankly, I believe this even if we had a President Ron Paul. You need the institutions there to check everyone.
We have time for one more question.
Looking at the speaker, I can't see because of the lights. If I'm not looking at the speaker when I don't mean to be rude.
Well, sir, now that I know that you're not looking at me, maybe my stomach will stop being so nervous. The Oklahoma bombings were a terrible atrocity. Tim McVeigh was tried and convicted. A memorial was built. As far as I know, all white redneck Army vets were not rounded up as potential terrorists despite the obvious association with the particular wacko group. Nor do we have to strip in order to drive a U-Haul truck. Aside from the obvious act of retribution that George II desired and subsequently attained at the expense of others, there have been a host of Bill of Rights violations against the American citizenry. My question is, what happened to change the milieu within the legislative and judicial branches to allow for such violations?
Yeah. Well, of course, that's the right question. I thought Bruce's point was very well taken when he said that no complicated phenomenon has a single cause. I agree with him that one part of the explanation is the fact that Timothy McVeigh and his friend Mr. Nichols don't have names like Muhammad and I mean, it's very difficult to avoid that conclusion. However, it is, in the interest of fairness, John Walker Lind has that kind of name too. So, but I think that that's part of the explanation. Another part of the explanation is the enormity of it. Believe me, I'm not defending it, I'm trying to account for it. Your question was to explain it. I think it's indefensible. I think it is understandable on September 12. I think it is understandable when there was this period of rage. To me, however, the abuse is in maintaining that position in the face of the mounting evidence of what a bad idea it is. I do not fault people. I am prepared to believe, and I believe this because people very close to me were of the same view on September 12th. And I am prepared to believe that those folks are of the best intentions. They act in good faith. They are genuinely not venal. Tim Flanagan, who was one of the architects of the administration's detention policy, expressing dismay at the fact that it has gone so far to the south and it has gone so obviously off the tracks, said in a newspaper article, "You don't understand, we weren't out to torture folks. We all thought we had white hats on." I really do think they meant that. The problem is that as the evidence mounted, that they were hopelessly off course. And as people on the inside, people, not folks like me on the outside, it's always easy on the outside to, lob brickbats at folks, but people on the inside, like the military and the CIA and the FBI, people who had devoted their lives to keeping the nation safe, when they were saying that this is a terrible mistake, It's not listening to those people, the people with the relevant expertise, and then watching as their forecasts became true and their predictions became true. That's the abuse. There are distinctions between 9/11 and Oklahoma City, distinctions that may or may not, in a perfect world, have justified the difference. But leaving those aside, it's certainly not justifiable to this day, 7 years later.
Joe, if I may ask the final question. Last year you related the story of your client that was reunited with his wife, and
Right.
I was wondering if there's an update to that story, that you might give a little bit of background for it for those that were not here last year.
Last year I talked about a client of mine named Mamdouh Habib. Habib was picked up in Pakistan in October. He was one of the very first ground captures. They thought he was somebody else. The U.S. rendered him from Pakistan to Egypt. He was held in Egyptian custody for 6 months. He was tortured horrifically there. The Egyptians got a long collection of confessions. He confessed to all number of horrific things until some of the really high-profile people were brought to Guantanamo. The allegations against him, based on those confessions, were the most extreme of anybody at Guantanamo. They said he was originally going to be one of the 9/11 hijackers. These are all things he confessed to. They had no other evidence of it besides his confessions. That he trained the 9/11 hijackers in the martial arts. He offloaded chemical weapons from a truck in Afghanistan. He surveilled targets. A broad collection of things. When just before I filed some papers that disclosed, because that part was not secret, the details of what happened to him in Egypt, and in particular the role of U.S. officers in transporting him to Egypt. I mean, when Mamdouh was taken there, he was blindfolded when he was put on the plane. But he scrunched up his eyes when they put the blindfold on, and then when he opened his eyes, there was a little space under here that he could see out of. You know, he goes like this. And so he could see the American officers that were bundling him onto the plane. And so, for instance, he could see on the wrist of one of the officers, I don't know if they were contract employees or officers, so I call them officers, but they may not have been military people. It was the U.S. flag furled over the top of his wrist, and the thumb was the pole of the flag. And he was able to describe that in some detail, as well as other tattoos, really distinctive tattoos on the upper forearm of another guy. Well, it would have been a simple enough matter for a judge armed with that information to order the government to disclose who that person was, right? Because there aren't very many people with that kind of tattoo who are operating in Pakistan as part of the rendition program and who happened to package a guy up from Pakistan to Egypt on such and such a day in October of 2001. And so 4 days after that information was filed and became public, the U.S. government announced that Mamdouh Habib, despite these allegations, was going to be released. And a few weeks after that, I was asked to come to Cuba and, at the request of the Australian government, Habib is Australian, and fly home from Guantanamo to Sydney. I am the only lawyer who has been allowed to accompany a client home from the base. They've now released about 500 people, and no lawyer has been allowed to accompany a client home apart from me. And which I think they did, not as a favor to me, obviously, but as a favor to the Australian government. And I was there when he was reunited with his family. And I told this story, being there when he first saw his family again. At one point during his interrogations, U.S. interrogators told him that his wife was dead. And I saw him when he was reunited with his wife and collapsed into his arms, her arms, sobbing. And it was a memory that I will live with forever. I don't remember if I was asked this, but since I have been back here this trip, people have asked me the same question, Jacob, that you just did. He ran for office on the Green Party, ran for Parliament unsuccessfully. There's a limit to what I can say, of course, but I will say what I have said to others. I am very worried about Mamdouh.